It was just a regular day at the enforcer's headquarters. Commander Feral, by you sitting at his office, getting through some port reports on anything that happened lately, when he received a call from one of his own superiors, informing him that he personally is going to be overseen by some other two other officers to overlooking that Dr. Abby Sinian's latest excavation outside town. Even though that Farrell is not questions any orders, but this time he asked for at least why he personally had to be overlooking and watching over this excavation. According to his superiors, they told him that this excavation was contained some old tombs from a very old medieval periods that might contain some value artifacts, and that since Dr. Abbott and her team doesn't even have any other safe protection on any guards, so she had been requested to the mayor if she can have some sort of protection or at least some trustworthy security guards that can protect the artifacts not from being stolen. So the mayor had contacted the enforcers supreme head command, and they had later then reached out to Farrell and gave him the order to do so. And he personally was very annoyed about this position, but he would not even though he would try to maybe ask for if they could send someone else can take his place, maybe some other high-ranking officers. But his superiors did not even do what allow that. He was going to personally to do so, but then he asked for how long? For at least a couple of days, said his superiors. Despite he was so quite annoyed by this, but as a loyal officer, he applied for this demand of his orders, and he said that he will take care of that problem, and he did so. He told the two officers that they will be guarding the site, but he won't be there, at least for the first few hours, because he had to take care of some things at the office at first. Even though when the two officers arrived at the area, Dr. Abby was in a full working when she saw these two officers. She was surprised with only two and not three officers, as she had been promised. But one of the officers explained that their commanders will be there later on, later the day, because he had to take care of some things back then in the office. And though even though Dr. Abb herself was felt thought that it was okay since that happens a lot for herself also. And it was right, because only about 3 hours later, Commander Ulysses Feral arrived at the site. He asked the two officers if anything had happened, if any disturbance like that, but both reported nothing has even happened at the moment. They had just been observing uh, some of the archaeologists and scientists have been recovering some old tombs artifacts. Even though some of the officers first he didn't even question about the orders, but he said if he could speak freely, and Commander Farrell allowed that. And he asked, why would we need to protect this? This artifact doesn't seem to be such important, or it is such value like gold, silver, or diamonds. This is just old wooden artifacts, or at least made of clay or something like that, sir. Even though Farrell himself was very agreed with some of these officers, um, even his thought about it. But since these artifacts, even they're not made of gold, silver, or even diamonds, they're still very important to the site, to the city's history. And since these artifacts, even despite they're made of wood or clay, they're still very valuable to the museum community, and since they represent the earliest stage on the foundation of the Megacat city. Even though despite that Feral himself was not very much interested in history or anything like that, but he saw the potential value in those like Abby did. Because even though despite he was not much interested in history, but he respected and protected every single artifact that we found, either inside the city or the outskirts, because any of those potential artifacts could represent the early stage and foundation of the founding of the entire city later on. Even after in later afternoon, when the scientists when this excavation team shut down for the day, Dr. Abby had invited Commander Farrell to her tent to have some discussions. At the tent, he asked her if they need any more of her in in any of their surveys for the next couple of days because seems they have been recovering most of the artifacts. Dr. Abbey said they would need them at least maybe as for 1 or 2 more days, just because they had recently found there might be another place that they're just only a couple of feet away from they're currently digging that might contain some more artifacts that will need to be excavated. Even though that even though Farrell himself preferred to be staying in the office, but he had to obey his superior's orders. Even though Abby tried to convince him to relax, not to be so serious all the time. But even though Farrell himself was very strict, very loyal to his command, and even Dr. Abby tried to convince him at least try to relax, and even despite he said that he always had to keep his guard up. And as he promised though, he will keep 2 guards at the site all night. But they will be relieved by another 2 guards who will take it over by midnight and onwards. Even though that even before Farrell left his office that same day, he asked his superiors if he was needed to be there even all day, even protected the night. And the superiors said no, but at least have 2 out of 3 guards at the site just in case. And the grower, of course, after that both Abby and the others had left the site, there were at least 3 scientists that remained at the site due to they want to continue to do some late work. Even Farrell was not expecting that anything serious would happen at night, because he gave the officers at the site the first strict order to report anything suspicious, even despite to the back to the office or to him personally. And he was not expecting anything to happen. But nothing did happen. Even though those during at midnight when the officers relieved the first post, those guards, they reported nothing as suspicious. Only that some of the scientists were left behind, did some late work, and the others had went back to bed. Even though nothing much serious happened. Early the next day, though, Farrell he didn't return back to the site until like in the early noon, because he had to take care of some things back in the office. Even that his superiors was aware that he wasn't there at the site, but he said that he will be there at noon because he had to take care of things back in the office, which sometimes he need to do that, despite being the high-ranking officer at the Enforcers Command, or at least the headquarters in the Megacat City. Even back in the excavation site, Dr. Abby was helping with her team while she was working. She was thinking about the Commander Feral. In her mind, he was quite handsome, but despite being such a strict, serious personality, she wanted him to relax and just have fun for a while, not to be in such serious tone of his commanding officer. Even when she asked some of the officers that was stationed there, as well as guards, like if they knew something about him, like particularly as person. Even despite they didn't see much about himself because they don't, since most of the guards or the other officers don't even interact much as about himself personally. But some of the guards had heard stories about him and just told what they knew about him. That he has a niece by the name Felina Feral, who is a lieutenant with the enforcers. And despite she asked them if he always is such strict, serious, and even on his spare time. Well, the officers mentioned that they don't know much about his personal life or his private life, but they assume that he might even be such strict, even serious, even as his private life. But they even asked if he was married or engaged or seeing someone like that. But as the forces the guards knew, they was not even aware if he was seeing anyone or if he was married or anything. But one of the guards suggests May said that he doesn't even seem to be wearing any ring or have any mention about seeing anyone. But the other guard said even if he did have someone in his life, maybe a fiance, a girlfriend, or wife, he may not even personally talk about his family life or like that, personal life during at work. But the only family dude they knew about is his niece. But other than that, not much about it. When Farrell later around arrived at the site about noon, he was asking the guards if something had happened, but the guards mentioned nothing that serious or nothing worth to report. Just that as a normal, they found some new artifacts and they were doing some tests on them, had been recording, cataloged, and like that. Around that same when he arrived, the scientist team was going to have lunch, and Dr. Abby was suggesting maybe that if asking Commander of Farrell if he wanted maybe to have some lunch with her, for at least to relax. The other two guards could always watch in the area. Even though Farrell said no, but Dr. Abbott said it's just lunch and you must eat some point. Even though that made him said once to know again no, but how about something to drink at least? Maybe some water or coffee. That was something that Farrell needed. After all, he was actually grieving some. He was actually wanted to have some coffee since he had even had a point to take any coffee back in the office. So he accepted for a cup of coffee. Even though when they sat down, they small talked, and of course, even then, Farrell started feeling a bit hungry. So he agreed to take at least a sandwich. They start talking about some of the recent discoveries she had found, even though she did see that Farrell was not very much interested about the odd facts or any history. So then she started asking about some of his personal military training, or at least some of that he had been doing. That sparked an interest. She even mentioned that she was in fact a black belt karate expert. That sparked his interest a bit more. He asked her some of this training she has been doing, and even since she finished her training, but she still maintained her training herself from time to time, mostly at her spare time. Of course, even though Farrell himself was the commander of the enforcers, he also was skilled in different martial arts like karate, ninjutsu, or just other type of martial arts. He was actually very impressed with that Abby had a black belt. Despite being a professor or at least a scientist, he didn't even expect her to just a woman in her early 20s or late 20s to early 30s to be having any sort of black belt experience like that. Then she asked him, how about she gave him a demonstration that they tried to fight against each other. Even though Farrell would often decline the offer, but since she was insisted, Then he agreed to do so. So they left the area just in case to go to find some place where more safe for them to do so. Even the other officers asked where they were going. He said they were talking about some personal things. So the officers were given orders to stay there. So they went to this other location where Dr. Abby and Feral started doing their performance of from this martial art. And as a big surprise to Feral, since that Abby's explained that she had a black belt, and sure enough, she proved them to be having the skills, and she was really fast and very talented in a martial art. He actually even congratulated her to being able to at least defeat him once in that. So even from that moment, Farrell started to open up a little more about himself and even started to relax. As the rest of the day goes, nothing much serious happened. Just a few more artifacts had been found in the dig, and as the night comes, the go comes and goes. By the next day, Farrell receives a message from Dr. Abby that there had been some suspicious cat people around in the area, and Farrell demanded to know exactly what kind of suspicious. There were there were at least four other cats in the far outside, far away from these off-limits areas. Despite they had only two guards, he demanded to know exactly what if they had done something or said something, but he said no. But is it that unusual that our people around in their excavations, mostly are elderly or maybe school classes are being allowed to be there to observe some of the diggings, but these four people were actually having mostly hoodies and they talked to themselves and even pointed to some different locations. And Abby herself was very suspicious they might be pointing out places or maybe trying to figure out where they're starting storing the artifacts so they could maybe take some of them that night. So Farrell asked if she needed any extra guards, but she said no, because if she has any extra guards, that may tip off these four people that they might be suspicious that they might figure out or may figure out that they're on to them. So Farrell agreed to not to do so. But he ordered the site to maybe replace the current officers with some more experienced and more well trained officers. As more or maybe or maybe to add two more, but in sort of undercover as scientists. Which Abby herself was not very happy about the idea to having two officers or enforcers to pretending to be scientists. But he said there would be some extra protection, not only for them, because they would not even be so sure if these four people would be taking, or even then they didn't care if they take force to require the artifacts they believe. Since this excavation had become public, so Farrell did mention, since this became public to the general public, ever since this they had made public they have found some artifacts. And even though they weren't mentioned exactly what kind of artifacts have been mentioned in the newspapers, and some people, mainly robbers, that strongly believe they had may found some values like gold, silver, or any other valued treasures that be worth of stealing from the excavation site, and that they have been now been scouting the area to figure out where they're storing the artifacts before being transported back to the museum. And Dr. Abby herself was devastated because They hadn't even found any such values or any such treasures on the excavation site. But even Farrell said they would even will know since they haven't become public about what you have found. So they would strongly believe that you have found that. And I would suggest you may have at least two or maybe three guards undercover as protection, just in case. As they're also for not only for for your findings, but also for you and your team's safety. As they strongly believe that these robbers may not care if you or your team end up being hurt. Only to them is to find, restore the treasures, and take them. No better regards to anyone else, protection or safety. Pharaohs do. It was silent for a brief moment when Abby said agreed that she will have three guards undercover as scientists. But she will inform her team about this so they were not being so surprising just finding out that there are three new scientists at the site without being informed. And Farrell agreed to do so. And he later informed his superiors, which approved this mission. And he was actually very right, because that night, as those three other guards was protecting the area, they was actually in a tent, waited for any signs of any other people around. And around midnight, they were right. Because one of the guards actually did notice and hears a sound from the place where the artifact was storing. Three people had arrived in the middle of the night and tried to get in, but as the guards was quickly and silently managed to overpower them and capture them before they were able to get inside. Abby was really impressed how the guards was managed to capture the robbers and so such quickly. Not only for that, because she even said thanks to Commander Farrell. If he had even suggested this idea, her precious artifacts may have been found or may have been taken. But since even Farrell did state it before that same day, that if the robbers had even found was looking through all the artifacts they had found so far, but if they hadn't found any sort of gold, any valuable treasures in their mind, they would have smashed all the clay artifacts, figurines, or anything in pieces in belief that some gold or some can be stored hidden inside some of the statues. And even wooden artifacts would have been destroyed itself, believing may contain some diamonds or any value gemstones. And that would have been a very, very devastating blow for not only to the people in town, but especially for Abby, who has been dedicating herself to find all the precious artifacts to being displayed for the public. But as of this quick thinking, as for Commander Farrell, she was really heartfully so grateful for him. So even then, after that this excavation has been closed, Commander Farrell was put back to his office as normal. But one day, he actually received a visit from Dr. Abby Sinian. He was not even aware she was even coming, or even had been scheduled to have a visitor. But she explained that she's there from visit to show her that her gratitude. She later found out from his niece that he was in fact only interested in one part of history, military, that he respected or that he somehow was intrigued about the Red Lynx during the Mega War II, and that he was very interested in some of the pilots and even technology weapons like that was from that era, and especially planes, helicopters, any sort of artifacts. So she had managed to track down a genuine replica, a miniature model of the Red Lynx plane, and she wanted to give that as a thanks, as a gift to him, as after he had saved her artifacts being stolen. But before when she was about to leave, he then was actually walked up to her and suddenly asked her something. He asked her out on a date, which really surprised Abby, even himself. But she said yes, and they actually decided to go to the museum. And she had arranged that they would have an exclusive view and even some of studying of the old artifacts and even things that was left behind after the war, and especially on planes. And she even explained that she had a friend who worked at the plane museum that had parts from the war. And when was told that, he was excited. They actually went to that plane museum as their first date. He was really excited, it's like a kid in a candy store again. He was really surprised to see all these planes, and they were even given personal, even special access to the behind this museum or the storage, what they could see that some of the planes has been worked on to restore it as is well conditioned. When he saw this and how much the plane itself and even even the same type of plane that Red Lynx once used, not his personal plane, but the something the same model, but the same type of color, everything. He was really impressed how to see at to being able to watch this one place at such close, and it was even allowed to be touching the plane itself was to him. It was like a dream that came true. He thanked Dr. Abbey after they had left this museum, and he said that he had never been able to see such planes so up close, and it was like a dream to him had fulfilled. Despite that he being such a serious or strict and self-impressive personality, for the very first time, he actually had gone happy, soft. He actually asked her if she was hungry, and she said yes, so they actually went to this restaurant not so far away from the museum itself, and they had a great time. They start talking about random things, actually, mostly about some of the things about themselves, since as the first date usually is best to get to know each other by asking and telling some things about themselves, like so they would know something about them. And even after all this happened, though, despite the things that happened, but things between Farrell and Abby remained solid strong in the death. But one day, when Abby was at the museum, there were an incident. A few cat polo people had actually walked in and as acting as normal customers or tourists. When they tried to steal one of the precious artifacts like some gemstones, some diamonds, and even some golden objects. Abby was asked by at the she was the wrong place around the wrong time. She was spotted, and she tried saying that what they were doing was wrong, that they were stealing from the museum, and she was calling police, or at least the enforcers. But the robbers managed to capture her, threatening her by her life, saying if she ever do that, she would not be alive leaving the museum. They managed to lock down this entire museum when Commander Farrell found out that Abby was holding a hostage by robbers. He was furious, but he tried to act more professional. But even after enforcers had tried to enter the museum, but it was repeated being happened once over repeatedly, we were responded by gunfire from the robbers. It apparently was 10 robbers. And Since the enforcers could not even get close to Dr. Abbey without any being repeatedly being fired upon, Feral would try to figure out another way, maybe try from the back side of from the museum. But as they find out, the robbers had already figured out which other ways they can take it. So the only option we have left, either they let the robbers get what they wanted and let them leave, and perhaps capture them later after that. But his niece, Felina, had another option. Contact the SWAT cats, which Farrell refused, because to him, they are just nuisance. They are not as vigilant heroes. To him, they are some sort of bad cats who would not be trusted. But after had been used all his other options that he had, and especially having his girlfriend at gunpoint, being threatened to be killed if the robbers was not allowed to go. So Farrell agreed, since he actually was in fact saved by them once before, from Mad Cat. So he agreed to let Felina to reach out to the SWAT cats, and they actually did arrive. But since they themselves had been informed about the situation and of other attempts by the four enforcers had tried to do, since both the back area and side doors had been blocked from the robbers, and since the only options that other entrance was the front door, but they had been heavily guarded by some of the robbers. They thought, what about the roof, going from the window from up there? But Farrell said that they had tried as well, but it seems to be the robbers had been thinking about the same. And from what they told, they had rigged the door with explosives. If anyone tried to enter by forcefully or even tried to disarm or anything, it would go off. And they were so powerful enough to destroy parts of the roof, and they couldn't be been unstable enough to even collapse, even right up top above Dr. Abbey. So T-Bone and Razor agreed to help, but they had only one request, which Farrell was a little bit curious to know exactly what kind. But he agreed to do so as long as it doesn't even really risk not only Abby's, but not only his officers' lives. They only require at least a team of the forces to help them. That surprised Farrell because they thought maybe he would require some heavily guards or heavily gunned or some sort of weaponry. Or maybe a helicopter or plane or something. But since their own Turbo Cat were not even useful in this situation. But they agreed. But then T-Bone said that he would be the one that's commanding this team, which that Farrell was not pleased about. But Felina explained, at least they were able to help. If they were able to help but save Dr. Abbey, and then he agreed. So T-Bone and Razor, since they didn't have any particular plan to save Dr. Abbey, which Farrell found out, he was a bit angry, but he said, but both Razor and T-Bone said since they didn't have the plan, since they were not informed about the situation before that ride, they gave the team of the enforcers open for any suggestions how they could save Dr. Abbey at the same time capture these robbers. Even though when the robbers themselves had been, what if they somehow block the front, they keep some enforcers close to the front entrance and somehow throw inside some sort of stun gas or maybe knockout gas or some sort of sleeping gas inside or something. That was something that Farrell had even considered. But that would mean, as the only way to stop the robbers and also same time to saving Abby and Ingrid. Abby was really at the same time inside she was terrified. She had no idea what's going on. The robbers was getting tired of being waiting. They now had to manage to get one escape vehicle big enough for all of them, along with a hostage. And Farrell said that the requirement for that such big vehicle would take at least a few minutes to even get there, since they had to find out the big one for 11 people. And the robber said if this is his one attempt to stall time, he was so wrong and mistaken about it. If they didn't have it within the next 2 minutes, Dr. Abby would be found dead, and it would be his fault. Farrell explained that the vehicle had just been found and big enough, and it was on the way, and it should be here within the next another 3 minutes, which the robbers agreed to wait maybe for another minute. Even Farrell tried to stall more time, because at the same time, the SWAT cats and the force team managed to walk through the windows and somehow shooting inside cases with sleeping gas. Since the other doors blocked, even the robbers tried to figure out what's happening. If they thought maybe this was some sort of tear gas. But as the team leader of the robbers saw, one by one of his members started falling asleep on the ground, or at least on the floor. He tried to stay himself covered by his face, but unfortunately it was too late. He was the last one to fall to the floor asleep. The robbers was finally asleep, and the SWAT cats, gave Feral the order, or at least the signal saying it was safe to go inside. So Feral's enlisted 10 people by gas mask just to protect themselves. And after that, the gas itself had been vented outside. It was safe to take out the robbers, who still very much was in a sleep state. But when they brought out Abby on a stretch, Feral was devastated to believe that she was no longer alive. But when he saw that she was in fact alive, he felt relieved. He walked up to her, but unfortunately she was still in a sleep state himself. But he even felt happy enough to do so, to seeing that she was okay. Despite that, he still didn't even trust or show any sort of respect for the SWAT cats, at least for one time. But now that he saved his girlfriend from being attacked or being killed, he walked up to T-Bone and Razor and said, "Thank you. I know I have said false things to you both in the past, but thank you. You not only saved my life once, but now saved my girlfriend's life. What can I do to repay you all for this?" Even both T-Bone and Razor just looked at each other and said, they both said that he doesn't have to repay anything. At least that they only require one thing: trust and respect. That he respect them and not see them as bad nuisance or at least some sort of bad guys. That they would consider them as allies. If they were needed their help in the future in some such way, always reach out to them, which he agreed to do so. Despite that, still have not much respect, but he has slowly gained the respect for saving his girlfriend's life. But after this, Abby was really happy to be okay though. She was really happy to see Farrell at his hospital, at least for another checkup. But then, Feral did state something that he could not even have a thought about losing her. After all, since the death and the attack on the museum, she he thought that if he had lost her, he would have lost everything. He probably had even would have resigned from the enforcers and let someone else take over as a commander, which surprised her. But he then said, "Why that? You still have your niece and you have your friends and SWAT cats to help." "I would not have even forgive myself losing you, since you're the one who had opened my heart in such way you did. And then I had only one thing to ask you." And then he actually proposed to her, despite they had only been dating for at least about a couple of months by the point. But she said yes immediately. When they told Felina, she was impressed at seeing her own uncle had proposed to his girlfriend after such short time, but especially to such strong event that has happened. But she was happy to see that her uncle had found his true love. Despite this, the wedding was supposed to be held in a few weeks. Even despite what happened, Abby was really happy to have found her true soulmate, in special in Commander Feral. But he had only one request to her, that she keep up her self-defense training. But there was one thing that he asked her. Why didn't she try to stop or at least attack them while she was captured? Well, she said at the moment she was frozen in fear, and she couldn't even think clearly, which he agreed to, which he thinks that was reasonable. And since there were 10 of them, and they also had guns, weapons, pointed at her, despite she would maybe to be able to defeat at least maybe one or two, or maybe had at most maybe three of the robbers, but she would have easily been overtaken, overpowered by others. And even doing that would risk her to be hurt even more. And Farrell agreed that that probably wouldn't have been the smart thing to do. So she tried to act calmly and try to win time, being able to escape from the robbers and maybe find a place where she can hide. But since the robbers was always around her and hold her tight by ropes, she was not unable to escape. But now she's happy to be with the one that she loved the most, because Abby and Farrell actually got married. They even invited the SWAT cats, which turned out to be their honorable guests. Even despite what happened after this, Farrell and Abby decide to have at least a few days of honeymoon at a small tropical island for at least a couple of days, but it turned out to be staying for a whole week instead. And after all this, Abby and Farrell was really happy to be the one they loved the most of all. Despite this, after just barely 3 years after being married, Abby announced that she was expecting their first baby within a few months, and it was a boy. They had decided to name him Ulysses Jr. after his father. And when their son was about 5, they were expecting another baby, but this time a daughter, and they had decided to name her Felina after a Pharaoh's niece. Both Abby and Farrell was really happy that they found someone they loved the most. Despite their unusual lifestyle that Abby is a scientist and Farrell is commander of the enforcers, but now when he has his own family, he takes their safety and protection quite seriously. And despite that he had now by now gained more respect for SWAT cats. He had actually had been asking them to look after his family, especially when if Abby was away for another excavation and that he was busy with the foresters. And of course, SWAT cats didn't mind to look after their son and daughter for them. And but for Feral, he was really happy to have been there when he went to this excavation when he met Dr. Abby, not perhaps for the first time, but been there to be informed and later on to find that he had found and met his future wife. Even for Abby though, she didn't even expect to end up getting married with Commander Farrell of the Enforcers. She never it wasn't even considered being married in the first place because she believed that she was too busy to even get married. But having Farrell in her life was something that she valued more than anything, even more all the treasures in the whole world. But Farrell, he was really happy to have found his love within Abby. For both Abby and Farrell, they were really more happy to be with the one they loved the most, despite how they end up being together in the first place and how they end up getting married on the wall. But despite this, Abby was really happy to have found her true love within Farrell. And this is how Commander Silas Feral and Dr. Abby Sinian found a true love got a big family together. The end.